Jack jumped and Washington jumped and Washington hit the rip over foul. And the guy who was here, the guy who was like 14.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This week we have David Titley from the department here. He is the director for the Center for Solutions of Weather and Climate Risk here at Penn State. So without further ado.
All right, well, thanks very much for having me, and we'll try to keep this to about 30 minutes here. I'm going to see how much I can cover. We'll just start with a very brief overview of kind of what's going on in the Northern Hemisphere. Take a quick look at the tropics, go back up to the Arctic, see how the sea ice is doing. Not as many people look at it this time of year. El Nino update, how the water situation's doing out west. Maybe look at how the groundhog did. Might want to get a new groundhog. And maybe even talk about will it snow here, because my guess is that's why everyone's here anyways, right? But now you got to go through all this other stuff. It's kind of like a class, right, till you get to the good stuff.
I have a varmint rifle.
There you go. Okay. All right. So I don't know how many people went to Dr. Pat Har's talk yesterday, but he basically said whenever you do a field experiment, that's when you get nothing happening. Well, sort of the analog to that, or the corollary at least, is whenever there's interesting weather happening on a satellite picture, it's always at the delimiter. So this is this morning's picture, something called the AVIO. It comes out of a place called the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. They warn on about 60 tropical cyclones every year based out of Pearl Harbor. And they're warning on two systems today. One is Winston on the far right, just off the edge of the picture, and then you got to go all the way to the other one. We'll just talk about Winston for just a brief second because it's kind of an interesting track. So this is the morning warning out of JT, and just for orientation, kind of see the history. Came up to, although they don't call them hurricanes, it came up to hurricane strength. That's the filled-in part. If you look closely, you'll see the circles go around the other direction because it's southern hemisphere. Came up towards Pago Pago, re-intensified, and now it's coming back towards Fiji again. So for anyone who's interested in the tropics, you don't have to wait till September or October and wonder what the Hurricane Center is doing. There's a lot of interesting stuff goes on during this semester, but it's all down on the other side of the equator there. So this is one of the more unusual tracks in the South Pacific there. Okay, we're gonna go all the way back up north here, and I hope people can see this. It's a little tough, and unfortunately these are screen captures here. But if you go to the National Snow and Ice Data Center, they've got it's an automated product, so there's certainly an error bar on it, but pretty much daily ice updates, sea ice updates in the Arctic Ocean. The thick black line is the average for about the last 30 years. You can see 1980 to, 30 years, 1980 to 2010. The dashed line is sort of the iconic 2012 season. That's where we had the up-to-date, the record minimum. Some of you who follow this stuff might know that last year we actually set a record min maximum. That makes sense to a crowd like this. Usually when I talk to the Rotary Club, I've lost them at that point. But it's a record min max for ice, and it's kind of interesting. We still probably have, at least by CLIMO, we have another 4 to 6 weeks to go. But it's been several weeks now, and we haven't actually created any more ice up in the Arctic. So if there's no additional real cold shot, abnormally cold shot for another 4 or 6 weeks, we may set yet another minimum in this early to mid-March here. So the red line is this year, the blue line is last year, and we'll see how that goes. But you'll start seeing that probably show up in the climate kind of Twitter, social media kind of feed. My guess is in about 2 or 3 weeks you'll start seeing that. So you heard it here first. Okay, I'd like to talk just a little bit about El Nino, just a couple slides. These came out of NOAA. NOAA puts out their Climate Prediction Center about every week or so, puts out kind of a nice update. And since El Nino, kind of is one of those big picture drivers for so much of what we have seen this winter and will probably continue to see for at least a little while, it's sort of useful to see what's going on. So just an overview of the anomalies or the departures from average. It's kind of interesting. The greatest departures for average are actually working their way back across the Pacific, and they're almost now just south of Hawaii, starting to get towards the date line. We've looked at this maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago. The the greatest anomalies or departures from average were actually much closer to South America. So we're kind of working our way down. The magnitude of the differences is starting to come down as well. So it looks like everything's pointing to probably maturing towards the end of this particular El Nino, which would make sense given its time. It's just kind of a time series. It starts back from you can see, from the 20th of January. And again, it just sort of gives you that, as you look down in time, you can kind of see how the anomalies have somewhat decreased, and now they're, again, coming back towards the date line there. Westerly winds, so a large part of this is as you change the ocean temperatures, you tend to disrupt the trades. So this is up at 850 hectopascals, roughly 5,000 feet. And again, starting from really late August up at the top to the current time down at the bottom. So time goes from early to current. And again, from 60 east, that's almost actually out in the Indian Ocean, all the way to 80 west. That would be towards South America. You can see the reds are the westerly wind bursts, if you will. And what you start seeing here is that for the last month or so now, 5 weeks, we really haven't seen that. So we're starting to see a reestablishment of the normal kind of wind patterns, at least at 5,000 feet. So again, another indication this El Nino may be kind of pretty much on the it's going away side. For what it's worth, here's a combined Climate Prediction Center and IRI, the institute out of Colombia their forecast. And you can see red, of course, El Nino, blue is La Nina, and the green is neutral conditions. So kind of a probabilistic forecast. And again, the El Nino falling off, the probabilities of that falling off fairly quickly. These are 3-month time periods starting from now, basically to September, October, November of 2016. And over time, an increasing chance actually of getting the opposite effect, or a La Nina. So for next year, for next winter, we'll have to maybe think about what that would do for our conditions here on the East Coast. Okay, so if you kind of get into that's all interesting, but nobody lives at the date line at the equator on the Pacific there, unless you're a toga buoy. What is the percentage of rain? Because I think everybody here knows the West has had a real significant drought. California is, very, very, very big deal in their drought there. And you see that for the last 90 days, unfortunately, there's not a whole ton of green over in California. It's kind of been about average. So even with this, the media's talked about the super El Nino, all that sort of thing, it's not being terrible. It hasn't been like last year where it basically didn't rain at all. But you would have if you were a California water manager, would have hoped to have seen a lot of greens on here out on the west. Oregon's a little bit above average. California basically at average. And even though it's raining, I think right now or within the last few hours in Southern California, overall they're a little below. And again, we see the temperatures have been up, and obviously they've been up on the east as well. I think we all know that. Okay, here's just something if you ever get into the water thing. This is not NOAA, but actually the U.S. Department of Agriculture runs a pretty nice site for especially out west and out in the Pacific Northwest. And you can start to see actually how the next water season is going to evolve. So this is something called snow water equivalent, and they've got these what they call these snowtel stations. And if you kind of think of a big almost mattress that's kind of squishy because it's filled with a fluid, the more snow that is heavier, so the snow water basically pushes on it, pushes the liquid up a tube, and you get to remotely measure that. So we don't have to have 1,000 National Park Service people or Forest Service people go hiking around, although a few of them do that to calibrate and make sure these things are doing okay. But basically what you see on here, out in the Rockies, a lot of whites, about average. California, whites to greens, 100 to 125%. Some decent snowfalls in Oregon. So what does all this mean? If you're a water manager in California, even though people have been seeing it rain outside, you've got to convince them and tell them that we did not get out of the drought at all because they were in such a big deficit, and this year barely kept up with that. So you'll see probably as we go into the summer a lot of stories on that. Okay, enough of that. All right, how'd this guy do? So this is pretty informal verification here, but what it looked like to me is that the groundhog on the 2nd of February, we had about a 10 or 11 degree positive anomaly for the winter to date at that point in the East Coast. Well, I guess it was 10 degrees in December, and it was still pretty warm in January. The 1st and 2nd, if you remember, was really warm too. 1st and 2nd of February, it was about 15 degrees above average. So, you know, the critters said, okay, no more snow or no more winter. So how did that work out? And of course, I mean, this is a good contrarian indicator because we promptly flipped to slightly to average or below average. So looking ahead, it's like, you know, if the groundhog was here, he says, yes, but it's a 6-week forecast, and we're only 2 or 3 weeks into this. So this is something called the NAIFS. I don't know if people have looked at or used the NAIFS, but it's basically the North America Ensemble Forecasting System. This particular graphic comes from the Canadian Environment Canada, because there is an NWS, a National Weather Service graphic, but they haven't updated their website since the 27th of January. I'm sure there's a reason, but I don't know what it is. But the models are all running. So this is basically a combination of the global forecast system and the Canadian model. The Navy model used to be in there, but they were voted off the island. I don't know if they'll get voted back on or not. They were voted off the island. But basically what this is showing for the east is probably about normal, and that purplish stuff is actually, the model's actually pretty confident it's normal. So normal doesn't mean I don't have a clue, but the purples mean it's like, yeah, I actually think it's going to be plus or minus a standard deviation. So warm in the west, not good for the drought, average in the east. So that's the 10 to 14 day forecast. Here's the 3-week forecast that does get us pretty much to the end of the groundhog's period here. Again, out of CPC, equal chances, so it doesn't look like any big cold spell. Dr. Feldstein, actually, some of his work has gone into what the CPC is using here for this. So if I'm the groundhog, maybe it comes down to, oh well, I lied. I'm sorry. So, okay, enough of that.
He's just a rodent.
He's just a rodent. Okay, so one thing that is always kind of interesting when we get a nice clear night in State College. So this is now, okay, we're done with all that big flick stuff. Now, you know, now let's talk about the important stuff about us. So this is obviously Penn State right in the center, State College. So looking out towards the Barrens. This is the Barrens down here, down towards Fort Matilda, Stormstown. And you'll see when you get these nice, clear, calm nights that you'll see, like up by the airport, you know, this is about 19 or 20 degrees. You know, you can easily see single digits or even below 0 down here. And it's only, what, a few kilometers, right? A couple miles. And you get this massive temperature gradient. But you got to have you got to have the calm winds. So last night we didn't have a lot of winds. I mean, 3, 4, 5 knots. One place had 10, but most places have, you know, 2 or 3 knots. This is about 5 in the morning here, and you can see no temperature gradient. So, you know, just one thing, like if you're doing either campus weather or forecasting for around here, watch out when you get the when you really go to 0 winds, because we have this massive temperature gradient. But tonight, unfortunately, I was kind of hoping we'd get the winds down, and it's really cool to see that, but nothing there. So I didn't get my text from your husband there, and you know, because usually Dr. Paul Markowski will tell me, because they live out here, and I'm right by that Penn State, and there can be like a 15 or 20 degree difference just in that, but not last night. Okay, I guess this is my little clue to I need to go to the E-wall here. Or we're just going to talk about links, but that would be kind of boring, so we won't do that. Okay, let's see if I can do this here and make it kind of work. So one of the things I like to do is kind of just, you know, quickly sort of see where you came from, big picture-wise, with the at least with the long ways, with the northern hemisphere, and then sort of look at where do we think we're going to go. So if we start, you know, back a few days, you kind of roll this thing forward. One of the things you notice is it's been a fairly progressive pattern. So, you know, progressive pattern, what does that mean? Not a ton of blocking, right? So we're sort of seeing this trough east, trough east, trough ridge. And when you see that, one of the issues, especially in the wintertime, is your timing can sometimes be hard. You know, you may not get a really, really intense system. Sometimes you can, but the timing can be a little tricky. So that's sort of big picture what we're seeing. You know, that ridge that has been kind of hanging around for almost years out in the Western Pacific, it's sort of squashed, but it always keeps looking like it wants to come back. So we'll see if that is the case. So this is now looking forward in time. I think this is on the GFS, if I'm not mistaken. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to basically analysis. This is, I think, just about everything I have is 0Z. I've just have not been able to update it pretty much since then. So we actually have right now, you know, pretty good trough coming in. So actually some rainfall in California. But you'll see that, you know, that doesn't hang out there, and in fact it gets, after about 4 or 5 days, gets replaced by a pretty good ridge and amplification, and that will be one of the interesting things we're going to watch here. But as you watch for us, you can start seeing the heights rising and a westerly to southwesterly flow aloft. This is about 3 days from now, so verifying Saturday evening there. So there's a Sunday morning. You know, zonal flows, and you know, and pretty fast-moving stuff. So here we go into, again, I'm not that good at moving my mouse on this, but you watch the ridge building in the west. So this is out by now Monday evening. Ridge building in the west, ridge building, trough in the east. Everybody gets excited. So this is where we all start to get excited here. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And let me just go over to the spaghetti plot. One of the, yeah, I just don't have a big enough screen to, no. Okay, I can look at one or the other. But,
will the control minus work for you to make it smaller?
well, let's see. Okay. This is where if I ran the world, I'd probably ban every PC and just have Macs, but whatever. Okay, thank you, that worked. Yeah, so one of the things that kind of shows up that's sort of interesting is the predictability isn't too bad. And I think if I manage to call up the right link, we'll look at, if you look at sort of DDT of the models, how the models have evolved in time, they've been pretty consistent. I mean, we've seen much worse in other times. Now, by the time you get to, this is Tuesday evening, so 0Z on Wednesday, you're starting to see, yeah, fair amount of spread in the spaghetti plot there. But up until then, for about the first 4 or 5 days, it's not too bad. And the GFS doesn't mean it's going to be right, but for whatever it's worth, it's being reasonably consistent. Okay, let's just look at, I guess this is now starting to update or try to update. So we'll go and look at there we go, East Coast, and start looking at what we have. So again, this is ensembles, and I hope that's okay for people. I kind of like looking at the ensembles myself. When you dig through this, what you see is, again, that progressive pattern. So the high pressure, you know, the colder air this morning moves off pretty rapidly, retreats up to the northeast, and then off the Atlantic coast. Big low coming up through the Midwest, and then really going up into Hudson Bay, going way to our north. There's kind of an interesting forecast situation actually coming up. Again, I wish I could read this better. 48 hours, let me do 48. So this would be Friday night, Saturday. I think I've got that right. And you know, we're going to warm up a lot on Saturday, but we might just sort of get glanced by this overrunning. And we may just get a little bit of showers. Some of the GFS, some of the numerical guidance is actually calling for freezing rain. I think that's going to be tough because it looks like it really starts to warm up. So it's always this battle between how much cold air really hangs in. But if we start getting these kind of winds, you know, I'm not sure I would go for a lot of frozen precipitation, but it's something, if you're forecasting, you're going to have to watch. But yeah, we just sort of get glanced by this. Warm on Saturday. You know, when you look at the ensemble plumes, The mean is about 48, 49 for a high here, but there's a lot of members going up into the mid-50s or so. So, you know, north of 50 is not a bad forecast probably for Saturday. And then as you keep rolling through this, there's an interesting feature which the GFS is starting to pick up. And you kind of see this little precip there just south of Chicago. You know, everybody's kind of focusing, or the big picture is going to be what happens with the coastal. But actually on Monday, you know, we might actually just get a little bit of precip that kind of comes out of this this weak disturbance, kind of almost as a precursor to the main event coming up. So, and the models, especially the GFS, have kind of developed that a little bit more over the last 2 or 3 runs. So it's certainly something to watch because it's easy. And you know, we've seen this, and we watched this happen in Washington a few weeks ago. Everybody gets super focused on the big event. And then this little event comes back, and like for DC, it basically made the 1-hour commute a 9-hour commute because everybody was so excited about their big snowstorm 3 days from then. And it's like, oh yeah, we forgot this. That was bad. So you got to, you know, if you're forecasting, it's like, yes, we've got a potential for a significant storm, but we got a couple things coming first. That event Friday night, I think it is, warm on Saturday, another little system on Monday. And then as you start looking at, you know, here we go for developing, you know, trough in the east, ridge in the west, and you start seeing the precip and the, you know, kind of almost the classic low forming down in the Gulf and starting to come up on these ensembles. But, you know, it's all over exactly where that is. So if you see the one that's like kind of in the center right there, I mean, that's almost like an Appalachian storm. At the same time, you know, some other members there are coming up the coast. Sorry about that. And so we're still, you know, I think really far out to say what's going on. But what do you look for a snowstorm here? Maybe even more so than the low? Where's the high? So where's the high? Where's the cold air? And when you, I'm not sure if I can do this, and yeah, let's see if this will work or not. It's a little bit harder to see, but the challenge with this midweek snowstorm is going to be that the high is not really where you want it to be. The high is being a little weak, although the 6C run of the GFS has tried to, the ensembles have tried to build the high to our north end a little bit more, but it retreats off the Labrador coast pretty quickly, and you end up with basically southeasterly, southerly flow. So you can look at these ensembles, and about half of them, you know, it looks beautiful. It's like -2 at 850. It's saturated. It's about a 539 thickness, and it's like we're going to get killed. And then you look at the other half, and we're going to get killed with 34 degrees and rain because it's all just above zero. So it looks like the question is not, do we get a coastal? We'll get some sort of storm. But the real question is going to be, how much cold air can we hang in there? You know, you got Climo going for kind of snow right now. This is a good time of year. But I would feel a lot more confident about a significant snow event if you could lock in that high. And neither the European nor the GFS seem to be too interested in locking in the high right now. It's just a very progressive pattern. And in fact, with this big low going up to the north in Hudson Bay, you know, you don't want to see a low to your north. That's not helping us. So that's going to be the, I think, kind of the exciting part here. How are we doing on time? Yeah, let me finish. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. Let's just look at a couple of the ensemble plumes because they're kind of neat. Okay, so, but we don't care about Allentown because we don't live there. So we'll go to State College. So here's the SREF. And this is 9Z. Okay, I'm all going to see 9Z first. So yeah, there's this little shot, you know, on, what would that be? Friday morning? I don't know about Friday morning. And then, you know, here's this kind of freezing stuff coming in Friday night. Just a little bit, only a couple 100ths. Going to have to pay attention so that doesn't come and bite us. And we're starting to now see at the end of the SREF, now, you know, we can certainly discuss how much the end of the model run of the SREF has ever worked. But we're starting to see the hints of that of that little precursor storm, and at least this run is calling for a lot of liquid there. So let's go and look at the, okay, well I hit the wrong, there we go. Let's go to the GIF. And we're not going to look at 12Z because it's not in. We can look at 6Z. So here is, whoops, right. So hopefully people have, this has been out now for a few hours. And if you look at these over time, the 6Z run is definitely colder. There was a lot of blue on the 0Z, and it looked really good until you looked at it and you realized the blue was all after the storm. And it's like, well, that doesn't do you really much good. And all the vertical lines where it's precipitating, a lot of those were red. Now it's like this coin flip. It's like this 50-50 split. The GEFS on the 6Z got a little bit colder for us, a few more tracks in a favorable position. But you can still see there's quite a few ensembles that are saying, hey, before you don't do your homework, realize that there could be a lot of rain here, and we may once again end up with what could have been kind of forecast. Okay, so let me just, because I think we're just about at the end of the time, we'll look at the near-term WPC, their probabilities on accumulating snow. So you can see pretty easy for us. No 1 inch in the next few days. That makes a lot of sense if we're going up to 50, right? So let's look at sort of their experimental day 4, day 5, 6, 7 look. So this is just percentage of, I think, a 1/4 inch of liquid equivalent of something frozen. So 2.5 inches of snow, let's say. So what is their percentage? They being WPC. So here's the Monday one. And that's that one that we'll have to kind of pay attention to. Nothing on Tuesday. Here's Wednesday. So we're in the 30 to 50%. When you look at, I don't have the graphic here, but when you look at what WPC is saying for precipitation, they're in about the 60 to 70% of something's going to fall out of the sky. So they're basically saying 70% something falling out of the sky, about a coin flip, maybe just over a coin flip that it's going to be frozen. Then you can see the probabilities coming up again just to our north, and we look longingly at Albany, and it's like, why do those guys have all the cold air and we don't? So that's where it is. So, if I was putting a forecast out right now, probably start as snow, and I would certainly talk about changing over to rain, but it's one of those cases in which another 2 or 3 degrees colder, and we get a very significant snowstorm. So if you're talking to county highway guys, whatever, they at least got to get ready for that. They can't just say, oh yeah, it's going to be rain. But at the same time, this is not at least in my view, this is not a slam dunk for snow. So, okay, let me stop there. I don't know how much time we have, if we've got questions, or we can do whatever we want to do, and who's running this thing?
Give me some questions again.
Okay.
Any questions?
No questions?
Yeah. To the extent that they're available, what are the European ensembles saying about the potential for cold air into warm personnel?
I mean, that's certainly something to look at. I did not have time to look at the Euro ensembles there. Yeah, I mean, but certainly that would be something to look at. What I did see on the Euro deterministic that I looked at, they were a little bit more aggressive on the trough, but at the same time, at least the 0Z run on the Euro was actually bringing the storm just a tad further inland, and it looked like we could be, start as snow, change as rain. It was kind of almost that inland kind of track right up the coast. But again, it's 5, 6, 7 days out. Don't like that.
I think this product is based on an ensemble.
This is like 60 members.
62 model runs,
yeah.
of which 25 of them are randomly chosen European ensemble members.
Yeah. So
to some extent, it's in there.
Okay, thanks.
Rich, anyone else? Questions? Going once, going twice.
All right.
Okay, thanks very much.
Next week, we'll be invited off on.
All right.
I see you coming out, but I just ate all of it.
What is it? 20?
We